The flashbulbs were a blinding assault, a predatory storm of light that turned the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel into a stage. This was the night of the Sterling Vance Foundation Gala, the absolute pinnacle of New York's philanthropic calendar. At the center of it all was Alistair Vance, CEO of Sterling Vance Global, a man who commanded the room with the casual arrogance of a modern emperor. And beside him, visibly pregnant and clinging to his arm, was his wife, Eleonora. Tonight, in front of everyone, he would not just drop her. He would shatter her. This single act of public humiliation was meant to be her end. He never imagined it would be the beginning of his. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and $1,000 orchids. Men in bespoke tuxedos, like a flock of sleek penguins, navigated a sea of women draped in couture. This was Alistair Vance's world. Eleonora Hayes was just living in it, or so he constantly reminded her. Alistair, tall and impeccably dressed by a tailor on Savile Row, clinked his glass with a senator, his laugh booming with manufactured confidence. His eyes, the color of cold steel, scanned the room, counting the influence, the power, the money. He was the CEO of Sterling Vance Global, a multi-billion-dollar logistics empire that had its tentacles in every port on the continent. Eleonora stood slightly behind him, a habit she had developed to make herself smaller. Her dress, a modest navy silk designed to accommodate her 6-month pregnancy, felt like a costume. She was an intelligent woman, a Vassar graduate with a degree in art history. But in Alistair's world, her intellect was an inconvenient, unmarketable accessory. He had married her for her name, Hayes, an old money name that gave his new money hustle a veneer of respectability. He had assumed, incorrectly, that the name was all she had. Alistair, darling. A woman with a face pulled taut by surgery, perhaps a Mrs. Vanderbilt of the modern age, air-kissed him. You've done it again. This gala is the talk of the town. Alistair beamed, placing a possessive hand on the small of Eleonora's back. We do our best, Cynthia. It's all about giving back, isn't it? He squeezed Eleonora's waist, a gesture that looked affectionate, but was, in reality, a warning. Stand straight. Smile. Don't speak. The main event of the evening was Alistair's speech. He was announcing a new, massive donation to the city's opera. He was at the podium, the applause thundering. Eleonora sat at the head table, right in his line of sight, next to Robert Denton, Alistair's COO and chief sycophant. And it is with great pride, Alistair was saying, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity, that we announce the Sterling Vance Initiative. He paused, reaching into his breast pocket for his speech cards. He fumbled. He checked his other pocket. A flicker of panic crossed his face. He looked down at Eleonora, his smile tightening into a grimace. She had been in charge of his speech cards. She had them in her small clutch. She realized his mistake and, trying to be discreet, began to stand up to hand them to him. But Alistair saw his moment. He was already under pressure from the board about a bad investment in Singapore, and he needed a scapegoat for his momentary lapse. He held up a hand, stopping her. Please, Eleonora, sit down, he said into the microphone. The room, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell dead silent. My wife, he continued with a short, cruel laugh, seems to be a bit overwhelmed. It appears she has misplaced my notes. Then again, she misplaces her keys 3 times a week. Laughter, uncertain at first, then sycophantic, rippled through the front tables. Eleonora froze, her hand still holding the clutch containing his cards. It's just... Alistair sighed, feigning exasperation. You try to give them one simple task. He then looked directly at her, his voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps the pregnancy brain is setting in early. Or perhaps, my dear, you simply aren't cut out for this level of responsibility. It's all right. He waved a dismissive hand. Don't trouble your pretty, empty head about it. I'll just have to wing it. He didn't just insult her. He neutered her. He painted her as an incompetent, decorative, and stupid child. The public humiliation was total. He had branded her as useless. Eleonora did not flinch. She did not cry. She simply lowered her hand, her eyes locking onto his. She sat back down, her posture perfectly straight. The room watched her, expecting tears. They saw nothing. They saw a porcelain doll, serene and empty. Alistair, basking in the perceived recovery, launched into his speech, his charisma winning back the crowd. But he had missed the change. He hadn't seen the ice form in his wife's eyes. He hadn't registered that the woman he had just publicly executed was not the woman who would be riding home with him. He had broken the gilded cage, and he had no idea what he had just unleashed. The applause for his speech was deafening. As he returned to the table, basking in the glow, Robert Denton slapped him on the back. Brilliant recovery, Alistair. Handled it like a pro. Alistair leaned down to Eleonora, his breath hot on her ear. See? That's how it's done. Try to keep up. Eleonora simply turned her head, picked up her water glass, and took a long, slow sip. The first battle had been lost, but the war, a war Alistair didn't even know was being waged, had just been declared. The ride home to their Park Avenue penthouse was a study in oppressive silence. The Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the sleeping city, its interior insulated from the world, creating a vacuum that amplified the tension. Alistair was scrolling through his phone, a smug half-smile on his face as he read the early press coverage of the gala. Good coverage, he muttered, more to himself than to her. They're calling the initiative bold. They loved it. Eleonora stared out the window, watching the blur of streetlights paint fleeting stripes across her silk dress. She had not spoken a single word since the podium. Alistair finally seemed to notice her silence. He sighed, the sound of a man deeply inconvenienced. Oh, come on, Eleonora. Don't sulk. It was a minor gaffe. You embarrassed me by not having the cards ready, and I covered for us. You need to develop a thicker skin if you're going to be Mrs. Vance. Eleonora turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable in the dark. You didn't cover for us, Alistair. You filleted me. You used me as a prop to make yourself look charmingly beset by an incompetent wife. Alistair actually scoffed. Filleted? Don't be so dramatic. It was a joke. People laughed. It's over. Honestly, this sensitivity is exhausting, especially now. He gestured vaguely toward her stomach. You're carrying my son. My heir. All you have to do is look good and not mess things up. You failed at the not messing things up part tonight. I corrected the error. End of story. The car pulled into the private underground garage. The doorman rushed to open Alistair's door. Alistair got out without a backward glance, assuming she would follow. She did. She followed him into the private elevator. She followed him into the sprawling, cold, marble-floored penthouse. The entire apartment was decorated in shades of grey and black, a mausoleum of modern taste. Alistair loosened his bow tie, tossing his tuxedo jacket over $1 million Art Deco chair. I'm going to have a scotch in the study. I've got a call with the Hong Kong office. Don't wait up. He disappeared down the hall, already forgetting her existence. His dismissal was as complete as his public humiliation of her had been. Eleonora walked into their master suite. It was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. She stood in front of a full-length mirror, looking at her reflection. She saw the woman Alistair saw, the pregnant wife, the pretty accessory, the holder of a defunct, respectable name. She touched her stomach. "He thinks we're his property," she whispered to the child within. "He thinks we are just an extension of his ego. He thinks that name, Hayes, is just a bronze plaque on his shiny new building." She watched her own eyes in the mirror. The humiliation had burned away the fog of her marriage. For 2 years, she had tried to be the woman he wanted, the quiet, supportive wife. She had believed his narrative, that her family's legacy was long dead, that she was lucky he had rescued her from a life of quiet, faded obscurity. Alistair had made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed the Hayes family power was just in the name. He had never bothered to read the fine print. Eleonora walked to her bedside table and picked up her phone. She bypassed her usual contacts and scrolled to a number she had not dialed in over a year. She pressed the call button. It rang 3 times. A dry, precise voice answered, despite the late hour. "Yes?" "Gregory," Eleonora said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "It's Eleonora Hayes." She never used her married name with him. There was a pause on the other end. "Ms. Hayes, I have been wondering when I might hear from you. Is everything all right?" "No," Eleonora said. "It is not. But it's about to be." "I see," said Gregory Taft, the sole executor of her father's estate and the man who had managed the Hayes family trust for 3 decades. "He did it, Gregory," Eleonora said, walking to the window and looking down at the city lights. Tonight, at the Foundation Gala, he invoked the public disparagement clause, the moral negligence article, Article 7, Section 4. Gregory Taft drew a sharp, quiet breath. He did it publicly, in front of witnesses, in front of 300 of New York's most powerful people, and the press. He called me incompetent, useless, and an empty-headed burden. I believe the exact phrase was pretty empty head. "My God," Gregory whispered. "The fool, the arrogant fool. Your father always said, 'I know what my father said,'" Eleonora interrupted, her voice hardening. "And he was right. I was foolish to hope. But I'm not foolish anymore. I want you to execute the transfer." "Eleonora, you understand what this means," Gregory said, his lawyerly caution kicking in. "Once this is done, there is no going back. The dissolution of the primary trust is immediate. The voting shares transfer from the trust directly to me. All 51% of Sterling Vance Global. I am aware." "Alistair Vance will be displeased," Gregory said, in the understatement of the century. "Alistair Vance," Eleonora said, placing a protective hand on her stomach, "publicly insulted his pregnant wife. Now she is going to become the new chairwoman of his company. I want you to call an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. Monday. Cite shareholder prerogative. And Gregory? Yes, Ms. Hayes? Have a locksmith and a security team meet me at the Sterling Vance building. I'll be there at 8 a.m. to collect my husband's things." To understand the earthquake Eleonora was about to trigger, one had to understand the history of Sterling Vance Global. The company's glossy marketing materials, all approved by Alistair, told a simple story. Alistair's father, Thomas Vance, and his partner, Arthur Hayes, built a small shipping company. Thomas, the visionary, turned it into a global powerhouse, while Arthur, a quiet academic, faded into the background. When Thomas died, Alistair, a prodigy, took over and led it to unprecedented glory. This narrative was a lie. Arthur Hayes, Eleonora's father, was the true genius. He wasn't a quiet academic. He was a logistical savant, a man who designed the proprietary routing software in the 1990s that became the company's backbone. Thomas Vance was the salesman, the face. The company was originally Hayes Sterling, with Hayes holding a 51% majority stake, and Sterling, an early partner who sold out, and Vance splitting the other 49%. When Arthur Hayes grew ill, he saw Alistair Vance, his partner's son, for exactly what he was, a charismatic sociopath obsessed with image, not substance. Alistair was already dating Eleonora, charming her, seeing her as the final piece of his acquisition. On his deathbed, Arthur Hayes didn't leave his daughter a fortune. He left her an arsenal. He placed his entire 51% stake in an ironclad trust, managed by his lawyer, Gregory Taft. Eleonora would receive a generous stipend, but the voting shares would remain dormant, held by the trust for 20 years. Alistair, upon marrying Eleonora, had his lawyers attack the trust, but it was impenetrable. He was forced to run the company with only his 49%, having bought out the Sterling family, while the 51% majority sat silently on the sidelines. He was the de facto CEO, but he was never the true owner, except for one clause, a clause Alistair had never even known existed, buried deep in the trust's bylaws. Arthur Hayes knew his daughter. He knew she was kind, trusting, and prone to see the good in people. He also knew Alistair would eventually reveal his true nature. The trust, therefore, contained Article 7, Section 4, the Moral Negligence Clause. The clause stated that the trust would be immediately dissolved, and all assets, the 51% voting shares, would be transferred directly to Eleonora Hayes in the event that her husband, Alistair Vance, did commit an act of such profound public disparagement or cruelty as to fundamentally breach the covenant of good faith inherent in their union and his stewardship of the Hayes legacy. The sole arbiter of this breach was the executor, Gregory Taft. For 2 years, Gregory had watched. He had documented every private slight, every dismissive comment Eleonora had confided in him. But Alistair had been careful. Until tonight. Tonight, in his hubris, he had handed Eleonora the keys to the entire kingdom. At 9 a.m. on Monday, Alistair Vance strode into the 60th floor boardroom at the Sterling Vance Tower. He was furious, having been summoned by an emergency text from the board secretary. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked, throwing his briefcase onto the polished mahogany table. "Who called this meeting? I am the CEO. All meetings go through me." The room was already full. The entire board was there. Robert Denton, his man. Beatrice Croft, a sharp older woman who had been on the board since the Hayes Sterling days. Stephen Chen, the neutral CFO, and 2 others. I called it Alistair. Alistair turned. Eleonora was sitting at the head of the table, the traditional chairman's seat. Beside her sat Gregory Taft, who was meticulously arranging a stack of documents. Alistair laughed. It was a harsh, sharp sound. "Eleonora, what is this? Is this a joke? Are you and your dusty old lawyer trying to stage some sort of intervention after your little tantrum over the weekend?" "This is not an intervention, Mr. Vance," Gregory said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the law. "This is a transfer of power. As of 7:05 a.m. this morning, per the execution of the last will and testament of Arthur Hayes, the primary Hayes Family Trust has been dissolved." The blood drained from Alistair's face. Robert Denton looked confused. "What? What trust?" "Mr. Taft," Eleonora said calmly, "please distribute the folders." Gregory stood and, with the quiet dignity of an undertaker, placed a thick, leather-bound folder in front of each board member. "As you all know," Eleonora began, her voice steady and strong, "my father held a 51% majority stake in this company. For the past 5 years, that stake has been held in a dormant trust. Alistair was white as a sheet. A dormant trust. It's locked for 20 years. Everyone knows this. This is This is theatre. You have no power here, Eleonora. Please direct your attention to page 54, Gregory said. Article 7, Section 4. The board members began to read. Beatrice Croft's eyes widened. Stephen Chen, the CFO, took off his glasses and rubbed his face as if seeing a ghost. The moral negligence clause, Beatrice whispered, a slow smile spreading across her face. Arthur, you magnificent bastard. This is ridiculous, Alistair roared, slamming his fist on the table. You can't be serious. Public disparagement? You're going to seize control of a $5 billion company because I made a joke at a party. It wasn't a joke, Alistair. It was a character assassination, Eleonora said, her voice cutting through his rage. And it was the final condition of my father's will. Mr. Taft, as executor, witnessed your speech at the gala, as did 300 other people. He has certified the breach. The trust is dissolved. The shares are mine. She slid a single piece of paper across the table to him. It was a stock certificate, newly issued, bearing her name, Eleonora Hayes, 51% of Sterling Vance Global. You, Alistair whispered, his entire body trembling. You, snake, you planned this. You planned this, Alistair, Eleonora countered, standing up. She was no longer the shrinking wife. She was a woman transformed, radiating a cold authority that filled the room. You did this. Every time you dismissed me, every time you called me stupid, every time you treated me like an object, you were loading the gun. On Friday night, you just finally pulled the trigger. She looked at the assembled board. I am now the majority shareholder of this company, and as my first act, I call for a new vote. A vote to remove Alistair Vance as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately. The boardroom, which moments before had been a stage for Alistair's disbelief, instantly became a war zone. The air crackled with the charged energy of a hostile takeover. Alistair, recovering from the initial shock, morphed from denial to pure, distilled rage. You can't do this. This is illegal. This morality clause is archaic. It wouldn't hold up in a kindergarten court, let alone the state of New York. It was drafted by the finest trust and estate lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell, Mr. Vance, Gregory Taft replied, his tone placid. It is ironclad. We have already filed the preliminary injunctions this morning. Any attempt by you to access company funds or assets will be blocked by 6 p.m. today. Alistair spun on the board members. Robert, you're not going to let this happen, are you? Stephen? We just posted the best quarter in the company's history. Are you going to let her? He pointed a trembling finger at Eleonora. A woman who thinks logistics is about matching drapes take over? She's pregnant. She's emotional. She's clearly having a breakdown. Robert Denton, Alistair's COO, stammered. Alistair, this is a lot to take in. A 51% stake. That's a controlling interest. It's her, Alistair spat. She's not a businesswoman. Beatrice Croft, the older board member, finally spoke. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping the pavement. She is Arthur Hayes's daughter, Alistair, and I sat on this board when he was in charge. You, on the other hand, are Thomas Vance's son. All flash, no substance. I've been warning you for a year about the exposure in Singapore. You ignored me. The Singapore deal is sound, Alistair shouted. The Singapore deal, Stephen Chen, the CFO, interjected, his voice quiet but firm, is currently $300 million over budget and is being investigated by local authorities for financial irregularities. I brought this to your attention last month. You told me to bury it in the quarterly. Alistair looked at Stephen as if he'd been stabbed. You're siding with her? I am siding with the company, Alistair, Stephen said, adjusting his tie. "And the company's majority shareholder is Ms. Hayes. The bylaws are clear. She has the votes. This is a formality." Eleonora watched the exchange, her hands clasped calmly on the table. She had known this would be messy. She had counted on Alistair's arrogance to be his undoing. "The vote, please," Eleonora said. "A motion to remove Alistair Vance as CEO and chairman, for cause, citing gross mismanagement and reputational risk." "Seconded," Beatrice Croft said instantly. "All in favour?" Beatrice's hand shot up. Stephen Chen's followed a second later. Robert Denton looked at Alistair, his face a mask of panic, and then, seeing his career flashing before his eyes, he slowly, agonizingly, raised his hand. "That's 3, Gregory Taft announced. "With Ms. Hayes's own 51%, the motion carries overwhelmingly. Mr. Vance, you are hereby relieved of your duties." Alistair Vance didn't move. He just stared at Robert Denton, the man he had promoted, the man he golfed with, the man who had just hammered the final nail in his coffin. "Judas," Alistair whispered. "Security," Eleonora said, not to anyone in the room, but into a small earpiece. The boardroom doors opened. 2 large men in professional suits, the private security team she had hired, stepped in. "This is my building," Alistair roared, finally lunging to his feet. "It's my company," Eleonora replied, her voice ice. "Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Vance from the premises. He is to be allowed to collect his personal effects from his office, and that is all. His access codes are to be deactivated immediately." "You won't get away with this, Eleonora," he screamed as the guards took his arms. "I will sue you. I will sue the estate. I will take you for every penny. I'll tell the press you're insane. I'll fight for custody. You will not do this to me." "You did this to yourself, Alistair," she said, turning to look at him as they dragged him to the door. "You publicly insulted your pregnant wife. You just didn't realize who she was. You should have read the fine print." Alistair let out an incoherent yell as the door shut, leaving the boardroom in stunned silence. Eleonora took a deep breath, the first she felt she had taken in years. The adrenaline was pounding, but she held it at bay. She turned back to the shell-shocked board. "Well," she said, pulling the chairman's seat closer to the table. "That's that. Stephen, I want a full, unredacted audit of the Singapore deal and all related shell corporations on my desk by end of day. Beatrice, I'm promoting you to vice chair. I'll need your guidance on cleaning up Alistair's mess. Robert." Robert Denton flinched. "You have 24 hours to prove to me why you're not just Alistair's echo. I suggest you start by finding every file he tried to hide from Stephen. Am I clear?" Robert nodded, sweating. "Yes. Yes, Madam Chairwoman." Eleonora leaned forward. "Good. Now, gentlemen, and Beatrice, let's get to work." The next 2 weeks were a blur of corporate warfare. Alistair, true to his word, had gone to the press. The New York Post ran a lurid headline. "Iris Hormones, pregnant wife, seizes CEO hubby's company in insane coup." Alistair painted himself as the victim of a vindictive, emotionally unstable woman. He gave interviews from a borrowed office, claiming she was being manipulated by the vulture Gregory Taft, and that her pregnancy had made her erratic. He was counting on the sexist narrative to win him public support and spook the shareholders. But Eleonora didn't play his game. She did not give a single interview. She did not issue a statement. She worked. She and Stephen Chen, the CFO, had locked themselves in the finance department. The full, unredacted audit of the Singapore deal was just the tip of the iceberg. He was sloppy, Stephen said, at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, surrounded by cold coffee cups and printouts. He was so arrogant, he thought no one would ever check his work. "Show me," Eleonora said, rubbing her temples. The pregnancy made the long hours doubly exhausting, but the rage fueled her. Stephen pointed to a line item. "Here, Apex Holdings, a consulting firm based in the Cayman Islands. He's been wiring them 7 figures a month for the last year, classified as developmental consultation for the Singapore project." "And what is Apex Holdings?" Eleonora asked. "As far as I can tell," Stephen said, "it's nothing. It's a post office box, a ghost corporation. He's been using the Singapore overruns as a cover to siphon money directly from the company." "Embezzlement," Eleonora stated. It wasn't a question. Plain and simple. He was bleeding the company dry. He was building his own lifeboat, probably to finance a hostile buyout of the remaining shares, including, he thought, yours. He just needed more time. His insult at the gala, Eleonora realized aloud. It wasn't just him being cruel. He was under immense pressure. The Singapore deal was collapsing. The auditors were sniffing around. He was lashing out. He needed me to remain small and stupid. "There's more," Stephen said, looking grim. He pulled up a different file, wire transfers from Apex Holdings. He wasn't just saving the money, he was spending it. He showed her the transfers, millions of dollars moving from the Cayman account to a private New York bank. "Who does this account belong to?" Eleonora asked. "I had to pull a few strings," Stephen said. "The account holder is a Ms. Sabrina Reed." The name hit Eleonora like a physical blow. Sabrina Reed, a stunning, ambitious woman from the marketing department. Eleonora had hosted her at the penthouse for a team-building dinner just 6 months ago. Alistair had insisted on it. "His mistress," Eleonora whispered. The humiliation she felt at the gala was nothing compared to this. This was a betrayal that cut deeper than any public insult. He hadn't just stolen the company's money, he had stolen it for her. "He bought her an apartment," Stephen said softly, showing her the final transaction. A wire transfer to a realtor for a penthouse on Park Avenue, just 10 blocks from their own. Eleonora stood up and walked to the window. The city was laid out before her, a tapestry of indifferent lights. She thought she would feel rage or a desire for revenge. Instead, she felt a profound, cold clarity. Alistair hadn't just seen her as stupid. He had seen her as a complete fool. He had been laughing at her, with his COO, with his mistress, with the entire world. "Stephen," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I want you to call the SEC, and then I want you to call the district attorney's office. Give them everything. Apex Holdings, Sabrina Reed, the wire transfers, all of it." "Eleonora," Stephen said, that's not just a corporate lawsuit. That's a criminal case. He'll go to prison. He stole $300 million to fund his affair and tried to blame the losses on his empty-headed wife. Prison is where he belongs. What about Ms. Reed? Eleonora thought for a moment. She was a knowing accomplice to fraud. Give her name to the DA as well, and have our legal team file a civil suit to seize the penthouse. It was bought with stolen company money. It belongs to the shareholders. She turned back from the window, her silhouette framed against the skyline. The pregnancy, which Alistair had used as a weapon against her, now felt like armor. "He wanted a war, Stephen," she said. "He just didn't realize I had all the ammunition." Alistair's smear campaign came to an abrupt, screeching halt. The moment the DA's office unsealed the indictment, the narrative changed. Iris Hormones became the Vance conspiracy, CEO indicted for 300 metro fraud. Alistair Vance, the man who had commanded ballrooms, was now the subject of a perp walk. The images of him in a rumpled suit, his hands cuffed behind his back, being led into a black sedan by federal agents, were plastered everywhere. His attempt to paint Eleonora as erratic now looked like the desperate, manipulative projections of a cornered criminal. But Eleonora wasn't finished. The criminal charges would take time. The corporate governance of Sterling Vance Global would not. She had called a full, extraordinary meeting of the shareholders. The event was held not in a private boardroom, but in the grand ballroom of the Marriott Marquis, a venue large enough to hold the hundreds of investors, fund managers, and press who had descended. The room was buzzing. Eleonora, now nearly 8 months pregnant, walked onto the stage. She was not the shrinking, nervous woman from the gala. She wore a custom-tailored power suit in a deep charcoal grey, her hair pulled back. She commanded the space. "Good morning," she began, her voice resonating with calm authority. "We are here today for one reason: to restore integrity to Sterling Vance Global. My name is Eleonora Hayes, and as of 2 weeks ago, I am your majority shareholder." She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up, not with smiling corporate photos, but with flowcharts. For the last 18 months, the man you knew as your CEO, Alistair Vance, has not been working for you. He has been stealing from you. For 30 minutes, Eleonora laid it all out. She didn't use hyperbole. She used Stephen Chen's audit. She showed them the wire transfers to Apex Holdings. She showed them the false invoices from the Singapore project. She showed them the financial architecture of her husband's grand theft. "This," she said, "is not just mismanagement. It is a profound, criminal breach of fiduciary duty. It stops today." Alistair's few remaining allies in the audience tried to shout her down. A man from a hedge fund that Alistair had personally enriched stood up. "This is a family squabble. You're dragging the company through your messy divorce. What do you, a pregnant art historian, know about running a global logistics empire?" Eleonora looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I know that you don't sign off on a $300 million expenditure to a company that doesn't exist. I know that you don't leverage the company's pension fund to cover a bad investment, which Mr. Vance did last quarter. And most importantly, I know that the Hayes Sterling routing software, which this company still runs on, was designed by my father, Arthur Hayes. I grew up at his knee, learning this business while Mr. Vance was learning how to cheat at golf." The room fell silent. "Alistair Vance is gone," she continued. "His accomplice, Ms. Sabrina Reed, has been terminated and is facing her own indictment. His COO, Robert Denton, has been fired. We have a new interim board. Beatrice Croft is my vice chair. Stephen Chen is my acting CFO. We have cooperated fully with the SEC and the DA. We will retrieve every stolen dollar." She paused, letting the weight of her actions sink in. "But that is the past. Let's talk about the future." She clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a new logo, a subtle redesign. Hayes Sterling Global. A gasp went through the room. "We are returning to our roots," Eleonora announced. "To integrity, to efficiency, to the genius of Arthur Hayes. My first act as chairwoman is to announce that the entire Singapore project is being scrapped. We are writing off the loss. My second act is to announce a new 10% dividend for all shareholders, funded by the preliminary assets seized from Alistair's fraudulent accounts. And my third act is to announce our new CEO, hired this morning, a woman who has successfully run the port of Antwerp for the last decade, Ms. Helen Shaw." The applause started as a ripple and became a tidal wave. They weren't just clapping for the dividend, they were clapping for the decisiveness, for the end of the circus, Eleonora raised her hand for silence. This company is not a toy. It is not a piggy bank. It is a legacy. My father's legacy. And as long as I am in this chair, it will be treated with respect. Thank you. She walked off the stage, not to the sound of flashbulbs, but to a standing ovation. She had taken the public humiliation Alistair had dealt her and forged it into a gavel, and she had just brought it down, decisively, on his entire world. 1 month later, Eleonora Hayes stood in the corner office on the 60th floor, the office that had, for so long, been Alistair's. The black leather chairs and chrome desk were gone, replaced with warm woods, comfortable furniture, and a large framed original schematic of her father's first logistics patent. The company was Hayes Sterling Global. The press, once so eager to mock her, now called her the Iron Heiress. The stock, after an initial wobble, had soared. Helen Shaw, the new CEO, was proving to be a ruthless and brilliant operator, and Stephen Chen, now permanent CFO, had rooted out the last vestiges of Alistair's cronyism. There was a soft knock on her door. It was Gregory Taft. "They're here," he said. Eleonora nodded, taking a seat behind her new desk. "Send them in." The doors opened, and 2 men in suits entered. One was Alistair's divorce lawyer. The other was Alistair. He looked terrible. He was out on bail, pending a trial he was certain to lose. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed, desperate gauntness. He was a king in exile, and he knew it. "Eleonora," he said, his voice raspy. "Mr. Vance," she replied, her tone professional. "Please, sit. This is a bit much, don't you think?" He gestured around the office. "My office." "The company's office," she corrected him. "And I am the company. What do you want? Your lawyer scheduled this meeting as urgent." Alistair's lawyer, a man named Shaw, cleared his throat. "Ms. Hayes, Madam Chairwoman, my client he is prepared to offer a full concession on the divorce. He will make no claim on any assets. In return, he asks that you, as the primary victim and witness in his criminal case, petition the DA for leniency. Perhaps a lesser charge. Probation, not prison." Eleonora looked at Alistair for a long, silent moment. She saw the man she had once, briefly, loved, and she saw the shell that remained. "Leniency," she repeated. "Nora, please," Alistair begged, leaning forward. "Don't do this. Think of the baby. He shouldn't be born with his father in prison. It's not right. What I did, it was a mistake. I was under pressure. You know the pressure I was under." Eleonora placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked, as if in response. "The pressure you were under," she said, her voice a dangerous whisper, "was from stealing $300 million to give to your mistress. The pressure was from lying to the board, to your shareholders, and to me, every single day for 2 years. That's not pressure, Alistair. That's a sociopathic lack of character. Please," he whispered. "You ask me to think of my child," Eleonora said, standing up. I am thinking about raising a child in a world where actions have consequences. I am thinking about teaching my son that you do not get to publicly destroy a person, especially the person carrying your child, and then ask for leniency when you get caught." She walked to the door and held it open. "You will make no claim on any assets because you have no assets, Alistair. The penthouse was seized. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your stock options were voided for cause. You have nothing. You are not conceding anything. You are accepting reality." "Eleonora, you can't." "Get out," she said. "Mr. Shaw, if you contact me again with such a pathetic request, I will file for a restraining order." Alistair will face the consequences of his actions, the full consequences. Alistair stared at her, his eyes filled with a hatred that was potent, but powerless. He was led out by his lawyer, a broken man. Eleonora closed the door and let out a breath she felt she had been holding since that night at the gala. It was over. She walked to the great window, looking out over Central Park. The city was hers, the company was hers, the future was hers. She was Eleonora Hayes, the chairwoman of Hayes Sterling Global. She was a mother-to-be. She had been publicly insulted by her husband, and she had taken everything from him. Not out of revenge, she realized, but out of necessity. She had done it to protect her father's legacy and to build a new one for her son. Alistair had tried to make her a footnote in his story. He had no idea she was the author of his. 3 months had passed. The chill of that October boardroom battle had given way to the deep, biting cold of a New York January. The 60th floor corner office at Hayes Sterling Tower was no longer a battleground. It was a command center. Eleonora, now just days from her due date, ran the company with a quiet, decisive authority that had silenced even the most skeptical Wall Street analysts. The Iron Heiress nickname had stuck, but its tone had shifted from mockery to respect. Hayes Sterling Global, under the triumvirate of Eleonora, Beatrice Croft, and the new CEO Helen Shaw, had not only stabilized, but had posted a preliminary quarterly profit that eclipsed any of Alistair's. Eleonora had proven that her father's genius wasn't just in her blood. It was in her strategic mind. She had reinvested the seized funds from the Apex accounts into revolutionary new green logistics, making the company a darling of ESG investors. She had turned Alistair's poison into her company's cure. But the final act of the drama was not taking place in a boardroom. It was taking place in the sterile, imposing confines of the Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse. The trial of the United States versus Alistair Vance was the hottest ticket in town. It was a slam-dunk case for the prosecution. The paper trail, meticulously organized by Stephen Chen, was irrefutable. The wire transfers, the false invoices, the testimony of a dozen executives who had been bullied or duped by Alistair. It was a mountain of evidence. Alistair's only defense was to attack the witness. His legal team, a high-priced group of sharks paid for by the last dregs of his liquidated personal assets, had one strategy: paint Eleonora Hayes as a woman scorned, a vindictive hormonal wife who had fabricated a corporate conspiracy to punish a philandering husband. "They're going to put her on the stand tomorrow," Gregory Taft advised, meeting Eleonora in her office after a long day of pre-trial motions. "They will be merciless, Eleonora. They will bring up the gala. They will bring up Sabrina. They will try to make you cry." "Let them," Eleonora said, standing and moving to the window. Her large, round belly was a prominent silhouette against the winter skyline. "Do you know what Alistair's true weakness was, Gregory? He believed his own press. He thought he was the smartest man in every room. He believed that my pregnancy made me weak, that my kindness was stupidity. He's still making that same mistake." The next day, the courtroom was packed. Alistair sat at the defendant's table, looking thin and ashen. He refused to look at her. Eleonora Hayes took the stand. She was the picture of calm, maternal power. Alistair's lead attorney, a slick man named Harrison, approached her. "Mrs. Vance? Or do you prefer Ms. Hayes now? Ms. Hayes is the name on my birth certificate and on the stock certificates of this company." "It will suffice," she replied, her voice clear and carrying perfectly in the silent room. "Ms. Hayes, is it not true that you discovered these so-called financial irregularities just 2 days after a public and rather embarrassing disagreement with your husband at the Sterling Vance Gala. My husband publicly called me an empty-headed incompetent in front of 300 people, Eleonora stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. It was not a disagreement. It was a public humiliation. So you were angry, Harrison pressed. I was enlightened, Eleonora countered. His cruelty was the catalyst I needed to re-examine the man I was married to. When I re-examined the man, I felt it was my fiduciary duty, as the silent majority shareholder, to re-examine the company he was running. How convenient, Harrison said with a sneer. And in this re-examination, you, an art historian with no business experience, suddenly uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud that our client, a man with an MBA from Harvard, had supposedly orchestrated. Mr. Harrison, Eleonora said, leaning forward slightly, are you suggesting that one needs an MBA to read a balance sheet? Or are you suggesting that my Vassar education was insufficient? I found the fraud not because I am a scorned wife, but because I was the only person with the authority to look who wasn't on Alistair's payroll. He surrounded himself with yes-men like Robert Denton and sycophants. He never, for 1 second, believed that the decorative wife he married was capable of simple addition. Harrison paced, trying to recover. And this mistress, Ms. Reed, you found out about her, didn't you? This wasn't about fraud. It was about revenge on the woman who had stolen your husband. The courtroom held its breath. This was the moment. They were expecting tears, a breakdown, a flash of jealous rage. Eleonora Hayes looked past the lawyer, past the judge, and directly at the jury. Mr. Harrison, I found out about Miss Reed's complicity at 2 o'clock in the morning in a boardroom while reviewing wire transfers with my CFO. Was I hurt? Yes. This man, she gestured to Alistair, didn't just cheat on his wife. He cheated on his partners, his shareholders, and his employees. He stole $300 million from our company, to buy his mistress a penthouse. She folded her hands over her stomach. You are trying to paint this as a crime of passion. You are mistaken. This was a crime of arithmetic. He stole. I am the one who caught him. His affair is a footnote in his depravity. His fraud is the headline. He did not lose his company because he insulted his wife. He lost his company because he was a common thief, one who was arrogant enough to believe I was too stupid to ever count the receipts. Harrison had no more questions. The verdict came 2 days later. Eleonora was not in court. She had, in the early hours of that morning, gone into labor. She was in a private room at Lenox Hill Hospital, the city lights twinkling outside, when Gregory Taft walked in. The room was quiet, save for the soft new sounds of a sleeping infant in her arms. Gregory, she whispered, her face tired but radiant. You're just in time. Gregory, a man not known for emotional displays, found himself smiling, his eyes misty. Eleonora. He's perfect. He's a boy, she said, tracing the baby's tiny hand. A new generation of Hayes, Gregory said softly. He sat in the chair beside her bed. What's the news from downtown? She asked, her gaze never leaving her son. Guilty, Gregory reported. All counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement. The judge was... Gregory almost chuckled. He was incensed. He called Alistair a man of profound arrogance and limitless greed who mistook his wife's grace for weakness. Sabrina Reed, having testified against him, received a plea deal for 5 years. For Alistair, the prosecution is recommending 20. He'll be lucky to see daylight in 15. Eleonora nodded slowly, absorbing the finality of it. An entire chapter of her life, a chapter of subjugation and deceit, was finally, irrevocably closed. The man who had tried to erase her was now being erased himself, relegated to a number in a federal prison. "It's over, Gregory," she whispered. "It's just beginning, Eleonora," he corrected gently. He looked at the baby. Have you chosen a name?" "I have," Eleonora said. She had thought about it for months. She had considered Arthur after her father. But that was a name of the past, a legacy to be protected. This child was a new legacy, one to be built. He was the first of his line, not the continuation of another's. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face, a new life born from the ashes of the old. He was a Hayes, through and through. He was her son. "His name is Arthur," she said, her voice full of a new, different kind of strength. "Arthur Hayes. Not Vance. The Vance name ends with his father. The Hayes legacy starts anew, right here." She held her son close, the weight of the company, the trial and the betrayal lifting from her shoulders. She was no longer just the iron heiress or the chairwoman. She was Eleonora Hayes, and she was a mother. The view from the 60th floor was nothing compared to this. What a story of karma and consequences. Alistair Vance thought his wife was just a silent accessory, a pretty prop for his extravagant life. He believed her pregnancy was a weakness he could exploit, and her intellect was something he could mock. He learned, far too late, that in a world of corporate games and hidden legacies, you should never, ever underestimate the person you push into the corner. He publicly insulted his pregnant wife, and in doing so, handed her the very keys to his kingdom. She didn't just get revenge, she got justice. She got the company. What did you think of Eleonora's incredible transformation? Did Alistair get what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and empowerment, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic real-life stories every single week.